Welcome, everyone. I see people coming in from the waiting room now. Very excited to have you. I'll dive right in a second. Maybe some logistics to start with. So I'll do a quick intro in a second. Then we have like the main part of the webinar where we're going through some exciting questions, and like in the end we also go through questions from the audience. So feel free to drop your questions throughout the session. Then we'll get to them later on. But yeah, a big hello to everyone. Welcome to our webinar on global visa shuffle, how companies are competing for international talent in the age of AI. So my name is Hannah. I'm one of the founders of Localize. I'll be your host today. Localize is a global mobility platform that makes cross-border moves easy for companies and their employees. And today's topic, of course, like in the age of AI, race for international talent is accelerating, and talent becomes even more specialized. And yeah, companies are at the center of it. Demand grows for highly skilled and globally mobile professionals, and so right now it's harder to get away with like finding talent locally. So global mobility, of course, like is impacted as well. Employers are not just competing with each other, but with outdated systems, shifting policies, the need to move fast. And yeah, from AI specific visas to remote work models, this session explores how forward thinking companies are navigating, on one hand, fast changing visa landscapes, misalignment between policies and business needs, but also the rising pressure to future proof hiring and mobility strategies. And to kick off, I'd love to get some insight also from the audience, kind of like where you're at today. So we are introducing a little poll, and then like, there's another one like at the end of the session to just see like how maybe your thinking and like your use of AI has changed as well. Um, the question is, what are you mostly using AI for today in the context of global hiring or mobility, compliance, immigration processing, immigration and visa application processes, identifying new hubs, or no use yet. As I said, like we have another poll in the end. We're also looking at the results in a minute, but before that, I wanted to get to the most important part. My speakers wanted to introduce both of them. Big thanks to the two of you for joining. So we have Eleonora and Yigit. Eleonora, if you want to get started, tell us a few words about yourself and like also how your teams are integrating AI into global mobility and people operations.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Eleonora. You can just say Ele. It's much easier. Or Eli. I take everything. I work as a talent partner at Cargo One, which is the German-based startup. We're about 100 people, and we're actually remote first since the pandemic. So as you can tell, we were not remote before that, but we decided that we like it, and we decided to stay remote. So in the past 4 years, we had to figure out what remote means to us and what we do with our global mobility policies, because all of our employees started moving all over the place. So it meant that our tiny people team had to really take over the compliance and, again, kind of build a whole strategy for the future and make it future proof as well. And right now with an AI era kind of like coming up, it's getting even more challenging because clearly it's changing the way we operate. It's also changing the way candidates operate or employees operate. So it's something that we are continuously figuring out even right now. So that's kind of like a new topic that's being introduced. And I think there's also a bit of AI washing. So I'm always getting confused and lost where exactly is the rule-based logic tech and where is the AI tech. So maybe we can touch on this a little bit as well today. But I do see how AI is changing for us, at least like certain compliance steps and research, especially research.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Thank you so much. And also very happy to have you. Yigit, handing over to you.
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Yiğit. I'm based in Istanbul, and I'm working for the headquarters in Hamburg, in Germany. Also, we have two headquarters, the other one based in Spain. And I'm working for the full benefit of our headquarters, providing solutions for the people and culture teams and employees by creating global policies and guidelines within the cross-border framework and managing vendor relations from headquarter perspective. So that's the company side, and our company is building wind turbines, maintaining them, providing services for different energy needs, and operating across all Europe and, let's say, all over the world. So we're a very global company. And that's why the use of AI and global mobility is very critical in terms of integration and a holistic view into how things should work together. From integration perspective of AI, we're looking into ways to innovate what we can do in this regard, how we can influence the workforce planning, and how we can shape the talent strategy on a more global level. And there we build some guidelines for the people planners, and then thinking around the risk mitigation strategies that is being.
Oh, now we lost you for a second. Oh, I think you're frozen. Eleonora, that's for me as well. Like, okay,
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
maybe
Am I
we'll.
back?
Yes, now you're back.
Okay. Okay, so what I was saying that we're building solutions and guidelines for workforce planning that would also help shape the talent strategy on a global level. And the impact of AI would be critical, and still we're in the phase of looking into ways to integrate the AI solutions into our day-to-day business, obviously.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And also thanks for being here today. As I said, we wanted to get to our poll. I think we can share it now to get a glimpse of, oh yeah, great. That's very interesting. Okay, so it's quite level. It's also interesting to see that there's still some who are not using AI yet. I think like, yeah, the compliance immigration processing, that's probably the biggest. And yeah, let's see, maybe that's changing now over the next hour. But thanks everyone for participating. And with that, I'll dive right in. Like maybe we can stay directly with the topic. Jigit, from your side, from your perspective, what global mobility strategies are getting traction right now? Which ones do you see companies letting go of?
Yeah, so if we take a step back, we're seeing a clear shift away from traditional and rigid mobility models towards more flexible and cost-effective approach. And I would divide this into two main pieces, namely permanent and temporary or project-based work. And one of the big drivers here is a simple question more companies starting to ask, do we really need a permanent move to get this job done, right? So considering the housing challenges and the relocation rules becoming more complex, the organizations are rethinking how they approach to the permanent roles. And instead of a full relocation, they're exploring options like cross-border remote work, hiring talent locally in international markets. And these approaches help reduce logistical barriers, speed up the hiring, and of course, support the sustainability by cutting down on the long-term moves. From temporary or project-based work perspective, the increased trend in short-term assignments and business travel is maintained, as these allow teams to meet and collaborate in person when it really matters, without the long-term commitments and the costs associated with that. On the other hand, the long-term assignments are on the decline, and they're being used more selectively, I would say, mainly for leadership or strategic roles where being on the ground is essential for success. On the other hand, and of course connected to that, employer of record solutions are gaining traction. They're especially useful for companies that need to hire quickly for short-term or project-based work in new markets without setting up a full-scale local entity. It's a practical way to test new regions, respond to project demands, or scale fast without the overhead needs with full legal presence. We're also seeing companies move away from one-size-fits-all mobility policies. As I briefly said, it's rigid. There's more focus on the employee experience, tailoring support to individual circumstances, living more flexible areas for package selection, and using technology to make the processes smoother. more transparent and more efficient. And a big part of that, understanding the actual return of investment of mobility. When it comes to tools, many use still various forms of manual, like Excel spreadsheets and the Word forms and so on to track the cases. However, there's a strong push from stakeholders who want better visibility, the employee side, the talent side, and the business side, to understand the steps of the process so they can make smarter and more informed decisions and be prepared for the talent to move. And last but not least, this sounds a bit interesting to me when we think about the consequences, the environmental, social, and governance, the ESG side. It's starting to shape the mobility area as the younger and sustainability conscious generations enter into the workforce and take larger part of that. And to some extent, it's of course supported by the international commitments like the Paris Convention and so on. Companies started to make revisions in their policies, like encouraging public transport over private cars and revisiting their travel policies for the environmental impact. These points are not just about compliance or governance, they're actually becoming part of how companies attract and retain people. So in light of these, reflecting on our teams, global mobility teams are under pressure to transform their approach, their capacity, from solely managing moves to shaping strategy at a global level.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's also very interesting what you mentioned, like there's no one size fits it all, because I think like also now there's the companies like always had like different setups, like different sizes, different needs. But I think like now with COVID and like everything in the back of it, the playing field just got bigger with like the options that companies have with like hybrid, remote, fully in office, etc. And like yeah, given that Cargo One, of course, like has a different setup. Would love to hear from you, Eleonora, as well, like how in general does Cargo One approach international hiring and global mobility, and like maybe also with a take of like what has changed now, like recently.
Yeah. So as mentioned, Cargo One is a startup and is German-based, and we're pretty much digitizing the air freight. So we are building the B2B software and the service, and also marketplace for freight forwarders and airlines. So it allows us to be completely remote because we don't actually have to be physically based somewhere in one location to build something with our hands. It can be very kind of software oriented. And so our approach is completely rooted in being skills first and kind of globally agile. It also means that we have integrated AI pretty much into everything that we're doing. For instance, if you look at the hiring process, it's completely asynchronous, meaning that our hiring operations are running 24/7. The scheduling is automated. All the interview kind of like steps are structured. And the pre-hiring assessments are also being sent out by the system like automatically whenever candidates take any steps, which also allows us to really be super efficient because I'm actually the only person in the talent space. So I'm the only person running the entire hiring. And I don't work 24/7, maybe sometimes. So it means that I really have to rely on a lot of tools. And it's quite a wide variety of tools as well on the hiring side, on the people operations side. And since we use AI so much, we also want and we expect candidates to use AI tools as well. And it's very helpful to see like their skill set with it, but it's not always helpful to kind of understand their authentic motivations, maybe in the process, or career aspirations, which is why we also had to adjust our process quite significantly to the AI tooling. We test every single step. For instance, in the application form, we have a lot of questions where we ask them to use ChatGPT or any similar tools. We sometimes ask to record videos. We also give work samples that are very confusing on purpose. So the ChatGPT will hallucinate and give some kind of trashy data, and it won't help them basically complete the task. And in some cases, we even have live tasks, even if it's a commercial type of role. So we will always try to test skills in real time. And I think partially what the AI is changing in the hiring is on the candidate side is that a lot of people are using AI for applications. And so it's very easy to mass apply to a lot of jobs and kind of adjust your CV to every single job you apply for, which is disastrous on our end because it doesn't help understand what exactly candidate is looking for. And all the applications look the same. That's the other problem. We also grew as a company from 40 people to 120, like in the last 4 years. And we were a very small brand initially when I started, so we would not receive many applications. But right now, as a remote first company, kind of present in many markets, we receive thousands of applications per role, which also means that we're kind of being spoiled with this a little bit, which is also one of the reasons why we kind of complicated our application process so much and have the audacity to ask for videos, which we also record, by the way, for the candidates. So it's not only one way, but still. But we also see a lot of fraudulent candidate applications. So there's a lot of the CVs where after talking to the candidate, you realize that's not the real experience. They completely made it up from scratch and it's clearly AI made up. We've also seen that there is a lot of candidates who are using that to kind of perhaps get short-term freelance contracts if it's a remote opportunity. And that's also something that is probably kind of a fraud from the candidate side. But we can also dig into this a little bit later. Yeah, so we had to like proof our system quite a bit, not to spend too much time with those candidates and try to understand how we can spot this AI-based applications much sooner in the process as well. And yeah, so what we do is basically just focusing on a lot of automations and kind of personalized approaches to hiring. And from the tooling stack, it looks like using psychometric testing, better AI-focused kind of ATS systems and so on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like also it's that then it's like always like playing a bit of like catch up to what candidates like what new things people come up with. We definitely made similar experience, and it is interesting because I think like now it's almost like hard to always like to have long-term strategies and like, build something because like there's it's just like things are changing so fast. Yeah, and like sticking with the topic of like things that change very fast. You get maybe for you again, what friction points do you encounter when managing global mobility across fast changing markets and like also across kind of like the entire guardrails changing basically on an annual basis?
I think one of the biggest challenges here is the regulatory unpredictability and the growing lack of resources in the authorities. When you communicate them to clarify potential gaps in understanding the rules or the applications that has been implemented, it's hard to reach out to them. That's one of the biggest challenge nowadays. And thinking about immigration rules or tax rules, they tend to change nowadays very quickly and not always with much notice. That is making companies hard to catch up with that. But thinking on a corporate level, the technology ecosystem of the organizations is often fragmented. We need better tools that unify compliance, payroll, and employee experience. Then there's the cost side, of course. We have the target to balance competitive package with budget constraints. This is generally expected from the management, and of course the cultural integration of the foreign talent, since it's becoming vital to ensure that they can contribute, they can thrive in the new environment, and so on. And that's part of that. Of course, at the end, similarly, the policy misalignment is a growing issue. Many companies realize that their existing policies don't reflect today's flexible and agile work needs. And in this picture, people teams typically seen as the focal point to resolve everything and being asked to do more with less, and often without the right tools and cross-functional support in place.
Eleanor, anything to add from your side on that question?
No, I think it's very similar experience, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah. Then maybe on to the next question, because like we touched on the hiring topic, but I think like before that, like already thinking about where are you actually able to hire, like what do you want to make possible, and like also how can you do that like while staying compliant? What's your process for evaluating that, and like also how you see this change and evolve due to AI?
I think at Cargo One, for example, when we just switched from on-site to remote, it was a bit of a mess because we had no policy around this. We found out who employer records are, so we decided, okay, we will partner up maybe with 2-3 different companies, because back then, also 4 years ago, not every employer record would cover all of the markets evenly. So we kind of had to rely on different ones in different countries. And it was very opportunistic. So there was very little research put into this prior to actually hiring someone in that location. So as you can imagine, that was quite a big mess later on when we tried to align all of those initial kind of compliance points. And we have created, I think back in 2021, an actual sophisticated, like profound overview of all of the countries where we can hire, where we shouldn't hire, and which countries maybe are the gray zone based on certain things. So first of all, of course, where the strategic talent was. So for instance, if we're looking for a lot of engineers or AI talent right now or similar, there's particular countries that will be hotspots for every single type of the role or department you're looking for. The other will be the legal compliance and feasibility. So that's about the employment laws, availability of the employer records, because again, we're only able to hire in Germany ourselves, which means for every single country that we want to hire in, we need to rely on the employer record. And exactly same will be also like in terms of being able to offer fair and sustainable employment. So for instance, when we were expanding to the US, the PTO is kind of like almost nothing in the US. So we also had to figure out, do we offer double to align it with the German standards, or like what will be fair for us? So it also meant we had to really come up with a lot of philosophies around what is fairness, how do we approach it across different markets, and what's that baseline? And also, of course, another thing that we had to find out is that as a German-based company, we couldn't do a lot of freelance contracts because in Germany, it's actually quite serious to misclassify kind of your employees and have them as contractors instead of the permanent employees, which meant even through the employer records, we couldn't hire freelancers or B2B contractors. So in many countries, we also had to do like a completely different setup with permanent employment, which probably wasn't very common for talent in those countries. Currencies was also a big thing. We also realized that if we're hiring in a country where the currency is not stable, we have to have the resources to review the compensation very often. And also like that means it will fluctuate and jump the entire time for us as well. And we just don't always have the time for this, to be fair. And also like it just adds a lot of stress for the employees as well. So once again, which markets will be more reliable than the others when it comes to this kind of economic points? And yeah, and also probably kind of going back to that kind of the sustainable employment itself, because if we're hiring a particular team, we had to figure out as well which markets do we focus on. We kind of like I've kind of touched on this when I was saying that we were trying to look for hotspots for different talent. But for instance, if you're building a customer support team, it probably wouldn't make sense to hire 5 people in the UK and then 5 people in Bulgaria, because that will also be completely different markets and completely different kind of employment regulations and benefits and everything else. So we also had to come up with other strategies that certain teams need to be based in one set of markets. The other teams had to be based in different set of markets, time zones as well. So we kind of don't create any friction with the time zones, and it's very easy to communicate, and company meetings can happen at the same time, even though we're doing global coverage. So I think all of that had to kind of like go into that.
Yeah. No, it's very close as well to some of the experiences that we've made, because I think especially the communication part, like there is no single blueprint that like everyone's using. I think like also when it comes to like compensation, and then like if do you do like per market, or like do you narrow it down further? Then like there's like some yeah, like some parts that are required by law, but like also how do you provide consistent benefits across markets, and like benefits also valued like very differently. And so it's very complex, and like especially depending on the company size, like what complexity can you take on, but like then also how do you communicate around it? But that's an entire topic for itself. Like maybe now one topic that I wanted to shift to is the policies, like the regulatory aspects. And you could maybe for you, how does shifting visa policies affect the ability to plan and execute hiring across borders? And like also what are the changes and the difficulties that you've seen there in the last years?
Yeah, I think Eleonora has summarized very well some of the major points here. And, you know, the delays and new restrictions can mean losing top talents, top candidates, or missing project deadlines. It increases the compliance burden on people teams, the talent teams, and we feel the pressure to constantly stay updated, which takes time and obviously resources. In some countries, including our sector, many organizations had to rethink their talent strategy entirely, either by hiring in more immigration-friendly locations or leaning more on the flexible setups as a workaround, which has not been their common practice and comes with its own challenges. However, on the flip side, this creates opportunities for countries or companies who can implement attractive environment for talent to move there, right? Quick example that drew my attention is the EU Commission's latest initiative called Choose Europe, which is to create a fund and offer better working and living conditions. My understanding is the focus is on scientific research at this point in time, and this is mainly driven by the developments in the US, but I believe this is a great indicator for the future perspective, what can actually change and what needs to be done.
Yeah. Eleonora, maybe for your side as well, have visa and immigration challenges forced you to change hiring plans or timelines, and like how do you also see the shifting policies over time?
Yeah, definitely. So in the past, when we were based all in Berlin, we of course had to relocate a lot of people, especially when it comes to tech talent. So there were different policies around that. And then we kind of canceled that after going remote because there was no more need to actually be based in Berlin. So we could hire people in different countries and find a way around it. Then when we became more strict on which countries we can hire and which countries we can't hire, there was kind of an optional relocation that we don't ask for, but people, if they want to work at Cargo One, they would have to be based in one of the countries where we can hire. And so there was a lot of relocation for personal reasons and a lot of relocation just to join the company. And in some cases, there were relocations as well related to the market expansion. If we needed maybe one of our early employees to move to a different continent and help us expand. And sometimes that would mean maybe for a certain talent also to move to Berlin to be closer to the headquarter, even though we're still remote. So with all of those situations, we always had to face kind of like visa and relocation processes too. And it's quite interesting because we had to rely on localize quite a few times, to be fair. And whenever it's not Germany, we had to also rely on remote.com. So I think for us, being two people in the people team, me being alone on the talent side, it's impossible to kind of run this compliance processes and also like the relocation processes ourselves. So first of all, we had to build this support system with having trusted partners who can actually help us with these topics. But also additionally, we had to put quite a lot of trust and kind of in the employees, especially employees who are moving for personal reasons, because in many cases that meant if something doesn't go right, we might not have that employee start with us for a few more months, sometimes maybe up to half a year if the visa process is really delayed. So we also always had to take it into the account, like when we're hiring in a new location, for example, or in a country where people relocate for their personal reasons.
Yeah.
Delays are very normal. And
yeah. That's definitely interesting. And I think like also kind of like who's driving the move. I think like that's always interesting. Like that's definitely something that has come up more in the last 5 years. One very interesting thing that actually like one of the core hypotheses that Localize is also built on is that now it's less and less about like just companies driving mobility, but like also younger generations like wanting to move abroad. I think like studying abroad is so normal, and like then it's such a big hassle in changing to work abroad, like with visa, etc., like getting an employer who sponsors that. And so I think like there's always a compromise as well between how much does an employer need to spend and like facilitate versus like how much can also be driven by employees. And I think like that also changes, of course, like the packages, like how much needs to be spent on. I think like international trainee programs become very, very interesting, but that's definitely something that I also see like will impact global mobility in the next 20 years. Another big thing, because I think like they're on the other side, then we have still somewhat like antiquated government frameworks that sometimes like fall short in supporting business needs, and like also that make it very hard to like be pragmatic and like also give people the chance to like move somewhere. Higit, would love to hear your take there. Where specifically do government frameworks fall short today?
Yeah, I think it usually takes longer for them to react than businesses need them to. And that's especially true in fast scaling industries like tech, like renewable energies. And visa categories can be outdated in this regard. They don't currently reflect evolving work models like digital nomads or cross-border freelancers, although some countries started to implement some eased regulations. But overall, I think the biggest pain point here is the dependence. It's still a major gap. If a spouse or a partner can't work or kids can't access education, it becomes a deal breaker for the move, right? And governments need to be more responsive and adaptive to support the modern mobility models like nomads and commuters, as we said. And I get some strong signals from some of the EU countries like Estonia and Spain. They're showing promising signs with recent immigration reforms. And overall, I would say there's a growing interest over attracting skilled foreign professionals, probably again accelerated by the recent change taking place in the US.
Yeah, and definitely one thing that I also always observe is like when governments kind of like make lists of what jobs can people like get certain visas for, etc. But like that's just changing so much, and like then that list just becomes outdated within half a year. And like if that is the base of like making decisions, it's almost impossible. So that's an interesting one. I think like that will just become worse with blue collar becoming a bigger topic now. But yeah, I think like that we definitely need to see a change. You already touched on kind of like countries that have different takes. Would love to hear your view there, Eleonora, as well. Because like when we think about the global like the frameworks, but also like the hiring realities, what is your take on like which countries is it maybe like more aligned and like easier, and like which are the markets that really feel stuck?
Yeah. So for us, we predominantly hire in Europe still, but it changed quite a bit also since Brexit. For instance, some countries are much higher in cost of hiring. For instance, if you have to sponsor visas, so UK kind of instantly got off our list just because we can't sponsor visas there. First of all, it's just too expensive, and second, we don't have an entity. So even with the employer records, usually it's just not possible for us. When it comes to European countries, for example, Germany is actually not an easy country to hire in. It's quite tough with the employment regulations and labor law, but at the same time, there is a lot of great talent, and we already have a headquarters, so it was kind of like one of our top destinations and always like one of the biggest hubs to hire in. I think Spain became quite a developed country in terms of the headcount for us as well, because a lot of people want to move to Spain. And it's relatively easy, and also like there is a lot of potential and a lot of talent right now. Similar kind of movements we can observe as well in Romania and Greece. So quite a lot of people are moving there slowly. There is a lot of startups also like opening up, and hiring is relatively easy. But at the same time, we also had countries like Portugal, where there is literally right to disconnect. I don't know if you've heard of this, but employers cannot send emails or any messages basically to their employees after the work time, which is really hard for us when we have people based literally all over the world. So it means that you will be receiving messages on your Slack sometimes just because your colleague or maybe your manager is based in a different time zone. So it just automatically excluded this country from our hiring list, even though we would love to have it there. So it's kind of like this odd law that is there to protect the employees, but in the end actually doesn't let us enter the market. Ukraine, for instance, is another example. First of all, the currency fluctuation. Also, a lot of people are usually working B2B or freelance, which means for us as a German-based company, we couldn't also like work with that. And with the ongoing war, we also can't, for example, invite employees to join company offsites or being fully participant. Sometimes we lose connection as well, which is kind of not great. So we also had to figure out how to work with this, and do we want to continue hiring in this country or not? And there is a bunch of other countries as well that make it easier. For example, France is actually great on the digital side. They also have AI-related visas at the moment. So if you're hiring engineers, especially in the AI field, I think it's one of the top choices as well in Europe. However, again, they have to track hours. So the labor law is not very friendly. So for us, again, startup, remote, you can be quite flexible with this. It means that if you have to track your hours and you have to work 35 or 37 hours a week, it's very hard then for us to make it compliant and benchmark compensations across different teams evenly. So it also kind of is one of the reasons why we might take that country off the list. So it's just hard to align all of these benefits across different countries. And especially with this time tracking is also complicated, which is not only France. I think Belgium and Bosnia and a bunch of other European countries also do this. It's hard to make it compliant when you have folks traveling for work, and then their work time just explodes with far more than 40 hours a week purely because they have to take a flight somewhere. And yeah, so all of these things need to be included, like considered and included. And it's really made our hiring quite tough, knowing which country has 14 salaries, which country has 13 salaries, how to communicate it. And just one thing that I wish other companies would do a bit more is that to involve the talent teams in that and not just the mobility and the people operations, because it's usually the talent teams that speak to candidates and actually communicate and negotiate the offers. So for us, when we were kind of expanding and growing in new markets and new countries, we had to learn it a little bit retrospectively. So whenever we already make an offer and then we find out like, oh wait, there's actually 13 salaries, and the 13th salary is something you have to put on top. It's not in that amount. For example, Brazil does that. And in Greece, you have 14 salaries, but people usually know. In Spain, you might have 14 salaries, but you have to also talk through this. But there is some sneaky countries that have this weird add-on, like the moment you communicate the offer, there's something else popping up. So I think like it's good to have this internal collaboration between the teams as well to actually cross-share the knowledge and to be up to date on all of these policies.
No, fully agree. And I think like there's sometimes also then kind of like communicating to a talent like that, yeah, certain like parts that are legal, but like also what is like common in the country. And so like then there's like different expectations. And so there's definitely a lot of learning. So I fully agree, kind of like markets, not thinking about it like reactively, but strategically, and like what do we want to make possible? Like where do we also want to dive deeper to like get that understanding? But of course, like when there's hiring needs to happen fast. I think that's something that does not always happen. Um, but yeah, like also on that, now again, Jigit, for you, like what are one or two practical changes that would make a major difference in global hiring operations?
Yeah, I think from a regulatory standpoint, we'd love to see more streamlined digital visa systems, from shorter appointment times to pre-hiring eligibility checks. This would lead to real-time tracking, faster processing, fewer paper forms, and less rejections that would disrupt the business and operations. And on a company level, policy modernization and communication of employer value proposition look like a top priority here to better align with the evolving expectations of the talent, especially around flexibility and transparency of what you want to offer. And also the integrated tech solutions that would improve the visibility and internal coordination between stakeholders would create definitely a significant difference here.
Yeah. Eleanor, what's your take there? What are changes that would make a difference?
I think more countries to be aligned in general, or maybe at least within the European Union. Like,
Yeah.
it's just wild to me how different the policies are in every single country. It would be great to see some kind of alignment in terms of what is the future goal, maybe, or values for all countries to have, yeah, just immigration policies that make sense. And it's just a little bit more interchangeable.
Definitely. Yeah, and also I think like one big aspect is on the tax side, because I think like right now, especially also like for short-term mobility, it's a big topic. And I think like the tax risks, even though like theoretically, yeah, like borders are not that much of a limitation anymore, but like then especially like the working part that makes it super tough. And then maybe also for you, like what tools, partners, and internal processes like helped you to stay ahead of global mobility risks and keep it manageable?
Is it the question for me?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. So in terms of the tools, I mean, we do, as I mentioned, we do rely on quite a few partners. So that will be, of course, localized whenever we want to relocate somebody, especially if it's a relocation to Germany. We do rely on remote.com and Multiplier. And I think in the past, we also worked with Deal. So these are the employer records that we also rely on heavily when it comes to relocation to the other countries. And also employment regulations. And we use also tools like Figures, for instance. They do have some AI features in there, but they don't really advertise it, which I actually like because they don't try to wash with this. But generally, they have amazing benchmarking tools around different salaries and different types of roles and across different countries. So it really helps to also like pre-plan and realize like, okay, which countries we can actually hire the talent, how we can connect it and level it overall across the team. And we have a bunch of AI tools or like other tools as well, like for the mobility on the hiring side, but they're a bit less mobility focused.
Yeah. You get anything to add from your side on that?
Not much, but I would say AI can help automate compliance checks in this regard to remove the friction, to flag the visa expirations, tax risks, and identify policy mismatches and offer solutions before they become critical deal breakers. From hiring perspective, from cross-border hiring perspective, some tools already suggest optimal assignment or hiring locations based on profiles, potential cost impact, and legal feasibilities, of course. And on the employee experience side, some AI agents can provide 24/7 support for international talent, starting from their pre-arrival procedures to company policy frameworks. Then if it's, of course, when well structured and embedded into company systems with governance and with rules in place.
Yeah.
We actually we're kind of testing one tool right now. It's called Langlog. So it's like an AI agent as well for internal use, similar to ChatGPT. So you can basically prompt anything in there in the chat. And we're training it right now with the company data. So we kind of trained it on the people operations side. Now I'm trying to train it also on the talent side and potentially on the visa checks as well. So before we actually make an offer to someone, or when we do make an offer, we can already check the eligibility. Sometimes people don't know what visa they have. So it's also good just to rely on the tool. And it's just something that as well you can actually build yourself and kind of use it for internal use and not rely on an external provider. Just an example.
That's a very good example. That it's also a good fit with the last question. Like, where do you see AI actually remove friction? I think like it's a perfect example, because I think like there are the checks, especially again TA, to like make sure that you have better alignment. Do you have like any other examples, Eleonora, that you want to share on that side?
I think the Langlog is the biggest one, to be honest, because it was quite a big game changer, and we're still just kicking off everything with them right now. But I do see that it's kind of coming up in pretty much every tool we're using at the moment. It's just, as I mentioned, it's hard to differentiate sometimes what's AI and what's the rule-based logic.
Yeah.
Because I think in majority of the cases, still rule-based logic that most tools are using.
Yeah.
Not really.
Okay. Jigit, what would you add? Where do you see AI actually removing friction?
Yeah, as Eleonora mentioned very well, it's about providing day-to-day support to the employees when needed, with rules and with structure in place. And on the mobility side, flag the risks, bring them to the attention, and create useful insights before they're flagged even.
Yeah.
That would be very useful for companies to work on potential solutions.
That makes a lot of sense. We also just launched the second poll, which is somewhat associated to that. So like, where does everyone see the biggest potential for AI in global talent mobility? So either like speeding up visa processing, compliance, automating candidate relocation, so like the candidate experience, predictive talent matching across borders, enhancing the employee experience during the moves, or like still TBD. We'll give it a few more seconds, because I think like then it would also be very interesting to go through the results. But I think like now we can first jump into our closing questions. What's one move you think companies should take today to stay competitive in the global talent race, especially as AI keeps reshaping the game? Do you maybe want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So I think it starts with developing the right mechanism tailored to your ambitions, tailored to your organization. If your goal is to be a place where retention is not a question, low turnover rates, stable workforce, and so on, then you got to ask, are we truly investing in the employee experience and creating growth opportunities? Okay, if that's the case, decide what metrics you want to monitor regularly, and then use AI to create insights can be a differentiator there. But if you're more challenged around talent attraction in the first place, then I would say focus on communicating your employee value proposition in multiple ways. It's a good ground to start with. But thinking more strategic, the more challenging but future-ready path would be creating a skills-based workforce. And that means hiring for what people can do, for their adaptability skills, not just what's on their CV, being flexible in how you move talent across the business, and upskilling the existing workforce for where you want to go. And in either ways, AI and talent management can work together if that's seen primarily as a kind of capacity booster, not just a shiny new tool that you want to use. It can take care of the heavy lifting for reporting, surface useful insights, and automate. But still, it's vital to use we use that with care and ensure the data is solid and there's good governance behind that. But to put that as a practical suggestion, as a key takeaway from what I'm trying to communicate, I would recommend setting up an internal AI task force, which can easily go a long way, considering the confusions and lack of ownership within the organizations. And if the task force is empowered to identify where AI can support business goals and how talent management fits in, they can build actionable roadmap with, of course, human decision making being the ultimate filter for action. Regardless it's a permanent role, temporary assignment, or a project-based work, or any other alternative model, that kind of focused cross-functional efforts has a huge potential.
Thank you. Eleonora.
Yeah, I think for me, it's definitely like companies should focus on being faster thanks to AI. So first of all, the research can be completely kind of automated. And for us, it's also being a game changer that we're able to move so much faster just because we can prompt things on AI and then develop as a proper strategy based on that. The compliance checks can be completely automated. The kind of self-serve support for be it internal employees or potential hires as well. This is also super helpful because I can't emphasize probably how many hours we spend on a weekly basis answering the questions from everyone, be it internal or external. So this is something that can be also like a huge help. And I like what Ijit has mentioned about kind of setting up the AI task force internally, because that's definitely going to pay off. And I don't have a crystal ball, but I do believe that AI will help to transform the talent acquisition roles and probably mobility roles into something like talent management. So you'll be more focused on actually moving the workforce in terms of the skill sets and what makes sense considering the future development of the company, development of the roles and departments, what it might grow and kind of change into, rather than just being very reactive into like, what do we need to do now? We need to move that employee from that country to that country, or we need to hire here. Like, so I do believe that AI will allow us to be a little bit more forward-looking and a little bit more focused on the talent management as a whole, rather than just being reacting to what's on fire at the moment.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Thank you so much. If we can reveal the poll, yes, perfect timing. So that's actually, it's super interesting that the second part, like the second option is coming out strongest, automating candidate relocation and onboarding. Yeah, I think like the onboarding part, like basically everything, like where there's like quite a few questions. I think like in the visa processing compliance, it's interesting. It's also something that we see with the less complex parts, like the more straightforward parts. I think like also everything like around the relocation, the moving, that is like definitely something where it's like first an easier use case almost. I think like on the visa part, because like there's so many exceptions, and so it's like I think the way that I would see it is like it's good to like do a first check, but like then sometimes like the devil is in the details. So like then if there's like visibility and like that probably being a complex case, like rather having a second pair of eyes on it, but like definitely also a lot of potential, because I think a lot of processes are straightforward as well. It's very interesting that the talent matching. Yeah, maybe that was not 100% clear on the phrasing, but I think like then yeah, the employee experience that also got somewhat, but like the second one seems to be the biggest. Big thanks everyone for participating in the polls. I think that's great to see. Now I know that we took a little bit longer to go through everything, but wanted to give everyone a chance now, yeah, to answer some, get some of their questions out of the way. If I'm not mistaken, I think like so far there's nothing yet, but I actually still have a question that I think could be super interesting to go through. Because I think like there we talked about the differences also between companies, like what is possible, what's feasible, and like one part is especially like how can smaller companies compete for international talent, and like what can they actually make possible, because like then often you don't have a big in-house mobility team, you don't have that many resources, you probably also don't have like 10 different entities like where you can hire people. So how can smaller companies actually still stay competitive? You can both just jump in, no clear order, whatever comes to your mind.
Yeah. I can say a few words from my perspective. I think the small companies can definitely lean into their strengths, which is agility and authenticity there within their teams. And many international candidates are drawn to the opportunity to make a meaningful impact and grow with the company from an earlier stage. So if you're transparent enough about what you can offer and what you're still building, that can actually be a strength when it's paired with a vision where you want to go, and to bridge the operational gap as you're considering a small team. It often helps if you standardize your hiring processes and educate yourself a bit on basic compliance requirements in key markets. I think Eleonora gave some signals about that already, right? So they can also benefit from strong external partnerships. Doesn't matter if it's advisory, HR, legal, or whatever, to fill in the gaps without needing a full in-house team.
Is definitely the agility for me as well, because we're like in a startup, you're able to move probably through the entire hiring process within 2 weeks, 3 weeks sometimes. And the kind of like the office stage and figuring out the mobility and what exactly will happen also usually takes like just a few days. And what we also observe right now is that a lot of people who want to move to a different country, and we have this option of choosing different countries and markets, and probably most startups who are operating in a similar remote setup will have something similar. We notice that more and more candidates are asking to receive an offer from multiple countries so they can compare and choose. So for us, it takes just kind of maybe half a day or like a few hours of research to really benchmark everything in greater detail for every single market. But for a bigger company, it'll probably take days, maybe a week, because somebody has to approve it, somebody has to review it, especially if it's a new market as well. So I think the agility and just the speed and the flexibility around it as well, like it's the top one strongest aspect.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Maybe one last quick question. That's always an interesting one. How do you balance the pressure to hire fast with the need to remain compliant in multiple markets? And also maybe like even extending that question, kind of like making things possible for like talents that are really like valued highly, but also like then keeping things like feasible and compliant.
Don't do it like we did in the beginning. Don't start hiring and then retrospect. Probably it's really good to invest some time and do a proper research in all the countries, and then use AI to like kind of notify you when anything changes, because that's exactly what I've missed for the first years when I built the kind of the whole Excel spreadsheet across all of the countries in the world and where we could hire, where we couldn't hire based on the regions and local policies and EOR coverage. But there was no one to notify me when something changed. So I think like being able to pre-build this, invest as much time as possible from the very beginning, but then rely on it and like have some technology kind of notifying and updating it for you. It's really important. Don't skip it. Because I think in startups, even right now, like when we have to do something urgently, we usually don't have the time. So like let's tackle it when it comes. But no, better tackle it before it comes.
Yeah.
Because it will probably be very, very hard to retrospect on later on, especially from compliance standpoint. Because if you have two employees in the same team on completely different employment regulations and contracts and timesheets and everything, you probably don't want to be in that situation.
Agreed.
I think from my view, right at that point, it's very crucial to embed compliance right at the beginning of the hiring process, rather than seeing that as a final checkpoint.
Yeah.
And this would, of course, mean training the recruiters or hiring managers, and understanding the local employment norms, and building pre-approved some kind of templates that would already go beyond what is expected for different regions if you're hiring globally. And some organizations also prioritize markets where they already have legal infrastructure, which allows for faster and safer scaling. But ultimately, speed and compliance can coexist. I think that's the bottom line, and but only when it's treated as a strategic enabler, not a kind of an afterthought.
Yeah, fully agree. And like my take would also be like fewer exceptions and like then rather communicating more about like why certain things are also not possible, because like once you like stretch and like do something that's like maybe not 100% aligned, it's very hard to come back from that, because then of course like everyone else like knows that that was possible, and like then saying no. And I think like a lot comes down to communication. Like there, not everything is feasible for a company to like make possible. But of course it's tough because like I think the employee's perspective is often different, and so just like really the communication aspect and like making sure that you explain that well. But we're approaching the end, so like I don't want to talk too much. Maybe now just summing up like what we learned. Super interesting insights, and I would love to ask my two speakers. What are your key takeaways? Like one or two sentences. What's like the most interesting that you're taking away from today, Eleonora?
Yes, I think it goes back to the importance of compliance. I think something that I've already mentioned a few times, but just talking to Yijit as well, like it just reinforces that all the time, like just how important it is to research and kind of do your due diligence before doing something. And also being always on top of everything that is happening in the industry or everything that is happening in the news, different government like changes. Because again, it's just something that goes hand in hand, and we need to really understand what's going on globally.
Yeah, you did.
From my perspective, I think I would like to underline the importance of building the right internal mechanisms, and creating the ownership internally would go really further, considering what we're seeing in the markets and in different countries. There's a lack of ownership, and nobody is actually aware of, hey, what can you do with that? What can you do with this tool? What can you proceed in this location, and that particular location may not be fully compliant with regards to the AI use and so on. And you may not have a roadmap to go through. And that's why the internal mechanism would be my key takeaway, I would say.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting because I think like there's so many complexities, and on one hand, also for my take, I think like AI can make a lot of things easier, but at the same time, a lot of the complexities like are still there, and like it's not something that AI can necessarily solve, because like it's also a decision by the company, like kind of like it's a bit fluid, and I think that will be very interesting, like also because often how does it change like the benchmarks, like the status quo, like what are most companies doing? Because I think like then also ultimately it comes down to like what is like the standard of like what companies enable, but like also we're not. But as I said, like I don't want to talk too much. Maybe like before we wrap up, would love to take a moment, share a few things that's coming up. I think there's a slide as well. I don't know if someone from the team can share it. Like otherwise, I'll just walk through it. Ah, there it is. So we have another webinar in August. I'm still confirming the date, but like we'll talk about another very interesting topic, business traveler and commuter compliance, the silent mobility nightmare, very catchy title. We're looking forward to that one as well. And then, of course, our Beyond Borders event series, which is returning this fall. Some of you might have already been there the last 2-3 years, Berlin, Amsterdam, and London. It will be very, very interesting. A lot of great speakers, a lot of networking. So I'm looking forward to having you there as well. And then otherwise, like all of that, you'll see on our LinkedIn. So make sure to follow us. Big thanks, especially to my two speakers today. It was awesome to have you on board. Great insights. Also big thanks to the audience. I hope you had some good takeaways. And then I hope to see everyone there for the next webinar, and especially at Beyond Borders, and like then maybe we get a chance to meet in person as well. And then
Thank you very
otherwise, have a
much.
great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.